Good afternoon. As it's been indicated, I'm from Saga, so my focus is very much on local government and the basic services as we experience every day as provided by local government. I've been requested to address an overview of service delivery challenges, and I will do that from the perspective of municipalities to kind of bring across some of the challenges that municipalities as a sphere of government also experience in their delivery of services to municipalities. Now let me just at the outset say that Mike and myself have agreed to disagree in terms of the perceived constitutional problem that we have, because we as local government believe that the only way that you can ensure participatory democracy is by having service delivery at the local level. This is where you will achieve true democracy in the country. At the outset, let me just say, real democracy on local level is only 13 years old. It's only 13 and a half years ago that we got wall-to-wall municipalities, and those very poor rural areas that we refer to this afternoon must only have access to municipalities and municipal services for 13 years. So I think we need to acknowledge that we've done a lot of work in providing those basic services to communities. However, we as SALGA acknowledge that there are some challenges in the service delivery, and I want to highlight just a few of them. I've explained a bit in the paper on that. For us, even as local government, we want to acknowledge that we believe that there's a lack of consequence for non-performance in local government. And for us, that relates to political leadership as well as administrative leadership. And we as SALGA say that is an aspect that should be addressed very seriously, and we want to sponsor what we call a consequence and accountability protocol. We know that the upper limits of both councillors and senior managers in local government are determined by the Minister of Culture. We feel that actual performance should be reflected in that upper limits. We know that you can be a councillor in a grade 6 or metro municipality, not doing anything for your work, and you can earn a huge remuneration as a councillor, whereas if you work very hard in a rural municipality with a very low income, you are hardly paid anything. You travel long distances and eventually it becomes a fruit of labour at a loss, a financial loss to yourself. So we say this accountability and consequences protocol should also take that into account when you look at the remuneration, but we also believe that this will ensure more accountability to your community by both the political and the administrative leadership. One of the second problems that we have is consultation and proper planning within municipal spaces. Now, there are two aspects to this. First is consultation between the municipality and the community in terms of doing the integrated development planning, which also informs the budget process. Now we know to a certain extent a lot of the planning processes have become compliance-driven instead of developmental in their approach. We have very good success stories. We believe that we should have more interaction with our community, high-quality interaction to make sure that the needs of the community are actually reflected in those integrated development plans. But that's just one level. If you do that, at least you can ensure that what you as a municipality plan actually responds to the need of your community. And it shouldn't be a once-a-year report when we go before we approve the IDP and present it to our community. We believe that you should have regular meetings within your community on ward level, and we as SALGA said, we don't believe that the ward committee is the answer to everything. You need to, for example, have ward meetings where the ward council reports back to the full board on also what the outcome of the IDP and budget process is, and every quarter we feedback on how far we are with implementing those municipal plans. But a very important aspect is what I call the ever-elusive dream of integrated planning across the three spheres of government. We had very high hopes for the local government turnaround strategy in the first and second version, as well as outcome 9. That talked about single window of coordination, but the reality is that very few sector departments actually participate in the planning process in municipalities. And this, I know that the Minister of Copta also agrees with our view that planning should happen from municipal level upwards, because that's the only level of planning where you actually get the community involved. And very often municipalities are blamed for schools not having access to electricity, hospitals not having water, but did the Department of Health, did the Department of Education participate in the local IDP process to indicate this is the planning of my sector department in order to ensure that the municipality in their 3-year budget and integrated development plan provide water in that area. And I think if you can get that right, a lot of the community protests that we currently see will be eradicated, because then we can talk about coordinated planning, everybody working together to a single vision, because every development, all work takes place in municipal spaces, and we need to acknowledge that. Then the next aspect is the skills in municipalities. I think local government's come a very long way in professionalizing local government. Probably with the new legislative requirements, the most qualified public officials will be in local government. However, when we talk about skills needs, we're talking specifically technical skills, engineering skills, as well as planning skills. The MDB, Municipal Demarcation Board Capacity Assessment, have clearly identified we've got a huge need for engineers and planners within municipalities. A lot of those rural local municipalities do not have an engineer, sometimes not even a technician in their service. They have one planner that must do all the planning in that municipality. And that's an aspect that needs to be addressed very seriously, because if you don't have an engineer or technician, how can you put out a tender and have a proper set of specifications for your tender? How can you adjudicate the tender, and once you've awarded it, how can you actually implement the problem? What we very often see is that you get consultants that draw up the tender specifications. The municipality battles in awarding the tender because they can't always interpret the specifications, and then once it gets to implementation, that is where the problem starts, and very often this is cited as corruption, where it is actually a problem of skills. And I think this is something that local government cannot address on its own. I think developing of engineers and planners is the first step. Then also I think we've gone a long way now that engineers and planners going to rural areas can actually receive an additional allowance to try and get these people, retain them in those areas. Then one of the other issues that I want to address is the legislation and the funding model. We have a lot of institutional grants in municipalities. Sometimes, however, the requirements for those funds doesn't really ensure that we can provide services. If I can just use an example, in order to create a waste disposal site, only a local municipality can apply for infrastructure grant for waste disposal site. If a district wants to take the initiative to have a regional waste disposal site, it's dependent on the locals within that district to contribute some of the money to ensure that the money is there, because the district cannot apply for that funding. And then with regard to the legislation, I think what we've seen of late is that we have a lot of shared services, but a proper model where all the municipalities involved in the shared service actually contribute to the shared service, but also benefit from that. However, local government legislation makes it so difficult if you want to have a shared service with regard to a basic service. It's got very expensive governance structures. It's got a very difficult process to establish those shared service, and the money that can actually be used to deliver the service are then used to do the assessment to see whether it's viable, and then the very expensive governance structures that you need, because it falls within the definition of an external service delivery. And I think we need to look at these pieces of legislation that can actually make it much easier for municipalities to enter into shared service, but not a thankful recipient model where district, for example, provide the service, but where the district and the locals contribute and then benefit from that service. Thank you very much.